I'd like to welcome you out this morning, June 20th. Happy Father's Day to those who possibly listen to me over the audio or over the YouTube out there. So we're continuing on in our study of Revelation, Revelation chapter 14. We took a couple pauses to really talk about some specificities and the verbiage of what it means to Israelites, what it means to the Jewish culture, things that aren't innately ingrained in me and your upbringing, things that I wouldn't necessarily know because I wasn't raised in a Jewish household. I wasn't entrenched in the Torah. I wasn't those things as I was growing up. Now, I certainly was taught the scriptures, but there's some historical and geographical context to these things, of the importance of these points of that we kind of miss out on because of the historical context. And we've seen that in the previous chapters. I think of the geographical locations of the churches and how more than likely it was the churches that John had started as he went through his ministry. It was these some even had specific events that had happened in that time period, like earthquakes and centers of commerce and things of that nature that we kind of don't know. I couldn't tell you those things without knowing the area, but because this is where they were from and it's because it was where they were sent, we were able to get a fuller, I think, picture of what he was trying to say. And I think that's important for us. Last week we talked about Zion or Sion, and kind of mentioned about how important that mount is to them, and I kind of correlated it with two other portions of Scripture, and I was flying through it, which is what I tend to do when I feel like I want to get a point across or I have a lot of things. So you can look forward to that next week when I preach. I'll go as fast as I possibly can. I'll probably sound like an auctioneer at some point. So the point of that was to show you that Revelation isn't an island. Revelation isn't the only time that this apocalyptic or the end time message is mentioned. That was to go back to show you that there's other portions of Scripture that I believe reference Revelation or are looking forward to Revelation or mention these trials and tribulations that are going to occur, or the end times. And it was kind of I think a broad, definitely broad strokes overview of those things. We could do weeks on just those chapters. I was thinking I was in Isaiah, we were in Joel. There was mentions of Isaiah 34 and Joel 3 for those of you who are writing. Yes, Don.
I left my biblical home.
Okay.
You said Mount Zion was significant because that's Jerusalem.
Yes, because it kind of has this encompassing view of Jerusalem. Sometimes it's used synonymously with Jerusalem. That if they mention Zion, or Sion, depending on how it's translated, it is an all-encompassing view of Israel or Jerusalem or God's chosen land. It is the mention of His city.
That's why they're called Zionists.
Yes, it's the idea that this is central to this area. We're going to kind of pivot and talk about another aspect of things that are mentioned in here that I think are ingrained in the culture that me and you don't innately get, that aren't really part of me and your culture or me and your everyday life. We're going to talk a little bit of the mention, and there's another thing that's mentioned multiple times here that, again, I feel would be amiss if I didn't bring it up. And that's the study of wine and the importance of wine to the Jewish culture and the things that are mentioned here, or specifically we'll see the wine press, we'll see the grapes. So it's an imagery that's mentioned throughout Scripture a lot. I think I read there was 160 different mentions of wine in the Old Testament. I'm not going to really get into the deep syntax of it all. But I think that there's an important portion of Scripture or important figurehead of what wine means. I mean, John chapter 15 mentions, I'm the vine and you are the branches, and talks about the fruit. And that's obviously talking about grapes and wine, and we see the winepress of God here. So we'll quickly read Revelation 14 and just keep an ear out for how many times winepress and things are mentioned. And I think it's very important to note, because if it's repeated or there's a kind of a repetitious nature of it, it's obviously something we need to look at. It's something we need to dote on a little bit and kind of look at and kind of understand a fuller picture of it all. And it says, "And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Sion, with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins, and they are which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they were without fault before the throne of God. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed him, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and shall be tormented with fire and brimstone, in the presence of his holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard from a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest in their labors, and the works do follow them. And I looked and beheld a white cloud. Upon the cloud sat one like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust his sickle into the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple, which is heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to help to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Interesting. There's a lot of different references to fruits, to winepress, to grapes. There's a clear mention of this like symbolism. This metaphor is put forward to us with the vine, with grapes, with wine, which winepress, the actions of it all. I'm not familiar with it. It's not something that I know innately about. I'm not familiar with the culture of wine and how it fit in with Israel. So it made me kind of dive into it a little bit more. This is something that they understood. Wine was important to them in their worship, in the things that they did, and also in celebrations and things like that. So I just wanted to open up a question. What did Israelites use wine for? And there's a couple correct answers. What was the use of wine for in their daily life? Go ahead, Dawn.
Well, we know it was used at a wedding for celebration.
Celebrations for wedding. Okay, so that's one.
And I've heard other things that wine was used, and again, now we kind of go into, did they drink the alcoholic stuff? We know that they did, because Psalms talks about looking not upon wine when it's red, and all this stuff. But that it was supposed to be more sanitary than water, because
it would
That
purify it.
to medieval England as well. People would drink stuff with alcohol rather than water, because water was often contaminated.
So we see that they were used in marriages, so for celebration. On the opposite end of that, it was used in mourning as well. It was used in when people were dying, and there's a couple scriptures, I actually forgot to write them down, about who's in mourning and things like that. So we see that it's a cemented part of their culture for momentous occasions. Right? It signified the arrival of an occasion, whether it be great mourning or great happiness. Wine was used in this occasion. It was a special thing. Can you guys think of what's one of the most famous?
Last Supper?
The Last Supper also is in there, but I was thinking one of the most famous images of wine in Scripture is probably the
Promised Land?
no. Jesus turning the water into wine. That was at a wedding, right? It was one of these momentous occasions. It showed his ability to purify. It showed his ability to. It was one. If I'm not mistaken, it was the first miracle that he did. And it was, I think, momentous in the fact that he was invited to this wedding. His mom was able to turn to him and say, like, "You can fix this." It was a really good portion of Scripture. I don't really feel necessarily led to go there. There's a lot of messages of wine in Scripture, but I think the underlying theme is that it's used for momentous occasions. That's the underlying theme. It showed significance of the time, and I think that kind of permeates this chapter. It's trying to show you the significance of this time period, and I think that's what the mention of the wine is. There's tangential explanations that I believe that you could use in these situations, specifically if you go to in John 15 when it's talking about I am the vine and ye are the branches and things of that nature. And it's a beautiful imagery of how it's supposed to go. But there's a lot of imagery in Scripture. I would really encourage you to look it up and study it for yourself. It was too big of a study for me today to go into every single mention of it. But the theme that I saw was it's for momentous occasions. It was to bring out, to signify something important was happening. And I believe that that's what is happening here in Revelation 14, is that it's showing that either the misappropriation of the Babylon, or of how they were drinking the wine of her fornication, or in contrast to that, the wine of his indignation, the wine of the wrath of God in verse 10, are two very different uses of wine here in chapter 8 and verse 10. Verse 8 and verse 10, not chapter 8. Verse 8 and verse 10 here wine is used synonymously in two very different ways here. We see wine being used of Babylon has tricked the world with the wine. And then we see the correct wine being used in chapter 10, which signifies the wine of the wrath of God, which I believe is the momentous occasion, or the pure wine. So we see this difference, or this dichotomy of wine, of how it's being used, and even then we'll get even further into it in the end of the chapter, where it's talking about the wine press and how there's mentions in Scripture of people saying that he washed his clothes in wine. I believe that was of how much they were able to. It was a sign of wealth, a sign of power. It was these things that kind of permeates by the Bible, especially Jewish culture innately. They do it for the Passover. There's lots of different aspects of it as well. But I think kind of harp back on it is that this is signifies or meant to show you that these are important instances, that they have this synonymous aspect of saying that this is an occasion which you need to observe. Yes, go ahead, Mima.
When it talked about Jesus turning the water into wine, I don't believe it was an alcoholic beverage. I believe it was a pure grape juice, because Jesus would never contradict his word. Where it says in Proverbs, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging. If your servants receive their wine, it's not wine. Jesus would never contradict it. I don't believe it was an alcoholic beverage. I believe it was a pure grape juice.
Okay. So Mima was saying that she believes in the water into wine was a pure grape juice. I didn't really want to get into like the syntax of it personally. I believe that creates a lot of different views. There's different things. Again, with Proverbs, it says that it has the wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging and things like that. But I was trying to stay away from that specific area of it. And that I'm just talking about the way that it's used, but I agree with you. The area in which that it's used, I think, is more important than the words and the trying to, because there's hundreds of different people who agree or disagree, and it's very fickle in certain areas, but I agree with you that it's the water into wine and strong drink is raging and things of that nature. So, but I feel like the more important aspect of it is the momentous occasion, the recognition of that this is an important figurehead of moment. Yes, Don?
If I recall correctly, Hank Minnick did a paper on this, and he said, I probably don't have the number right, but in Hebrew there are 14 plus words that mean wine. And some of it, but in the New Testament, the Greeks just had oinos as the word. So there's just one word for everything.
Yeah. So there's,
To make a distinction.
it's the limitation of the way it was written that doesn't give you the clarity in which, but you use contextual cues like Mima was saying to determine how it is meant to be taken. So again, it kind of goes along with the theme of going back and identifying or contrasting Scripture with Scripture to get the correct interpretation of it. And I believe that you guys are hitting the nail on the head here as well. So we see, and just real quick, I wanted to hit the very end of the wine press and things of that nature. In order to make wine, you have to crush grapes. I don't think that that's not a controversial statement. That is something that happens. Again, there's no things to talk about on that one. But when it is crushed, it does create this. It does look like blood. It comes out naturally looking like blood. And the using of the reaping of the vine of the earth, the wine press of the wrath of God, and then it comes out blood. I hope you know that I don't think there was a literal wine press, that this is a metaphor of the reaping or the destruction, I believe, in the Battle of Armageddon. And just a real quick little thing here right at the end where it says the space of 1,600 furlongs. Does anybody understand or know what that means?
Yeah, I think I can't remember. It was a number in miles. When you did the math on it.
It's the historical length of Palestine is how long that's supposed to be. So it's a very interesting, there's a lot, if you look at in the history of when they would measure Palestine, it pretty much exactly that long. So we see that wine sometimes is synonymous with blood. It has this beautiful metaphor of what God is using it for, but we also see the contradiction or the use of wine in a counterfeit of Babylon, making them drink of the wine, that making it look, and it kind of fits with what I was talking about before, that this false religion is going to look very close to the truth. it's the same imagery. They're going to say the wine of this, and this is what's beautiful. This is what it's going to look like, and God's going to turn around and say, no, this is what my wine looks like, and right now it's wrath, except for their wine that they drink of Babylon, of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So it is a beautiful imagery that I don't necessarily, I didn't really have this understanding of before, of the momentous occasions. I kind of just read it and was like, hey, it's wine, yeah, it's there. But it mentions it in verse 8, verse 10, verse 18, and verse 19, and verse 20. So it's important. I think there's a deeper study there. I didn't really feel led to go super deep into it. There was a lot of references, a lot of beautiful things about the vine, the branches, the wine press, some things of why it was used. It's permeated Scripture, but I think that's why it's meant to draw you to it. So I would encourage you to go study it and read it about how it's used in Scripture. It is a beautiful image that I kind of wanted to bring out to you a little bit as we go into chapter 15, I believe, next week. As we go into chapter 15 next week, actually not next week, 2 weeks. Mr. Scheidler is going to be given next week. We're going to see this beautiful, this amazing proclamations that we get to see of here, a bunch of imagery that's really, really good, a lot of things that are going to happen that the earth isn't privy to, but it talks about the contrast between the beauty of his temple and the purity of him and the plagues and the wrath. It's a really, really interesting. It's one of the shortest chapters, so we should only take about 2 months to get through it. Mr. Stewart, if you don't mind closing us in prayer this morning.
Father, we thank you now for this time together.